We're starting the next session, the afternoon session. We are having our next excellent guest and our afternoon keynote speaker, Professor William Hughes, who's also a good friend of this Congress. And we've known each other for years. And we just keep getting him back and back as soon as we can. And he agrees to it. So he must like us, I think. Right, but yeah, let me just share a few facts about William Hughes, about his academic career. He's a professor of medical humanities and Gothic literature at Bath Spa University. I believe this is no longer the case at the moment. Bill is working at Macau University in China, although he's currently staying in the UK for various pandemic-related reasons, I'm guessing. Yes, so just correct me if I'm wrong, because this biography is probably dated a bit. But anyway, so past president of the International Gothic Association, founder editor of the internationally revered journal Gothic Studies, a prominent member of the editorial board of Manchester University Press, International Gothic series, and one of the two editors of the Edinburgh University Press Companion series. He's also a visiting scholar at the University of Macau, and we already been corrected, so he's there currently, where he's one of the recipients of a research grant supporting enhanced public access to manuscript resources connected with Bram Stoker and his theatrical and literary associates. He's the author, editor, and co-editor of more than 20 books in the fields of Gothic and medical history, including Beyond Dracula, Bram Stoker's fiction and its cultural context, the Historical Dictionary of the Gothic, The Devil's Trick, Hypnotism and the Victorian Popular Imagination, Key Concepts in the Gothic, The Dome of Thoughts, Phrenology and the Victorian Popular Imagination, and many, many more, which we could be here for forever, and many more to come, hopefully. He's currently, oh no, that's probably not going to be up to date as well. Currently, he's with us here, and we're very happy about it. And again, before I pass the microphone to Bill, let me just say something from the heart again, because I've already said that it's a very good friend of our Congress and of many of us here, indeed, always ready to help and advise and have a good beer session in the evening as well. So that's all very often the most appreciated part of the day during the Congress as well. But today he's going to speak to us about a pathology of the undead, maladies of the modern vampires. And again, I was talking earlier in the day about Marius and how we met Marius Krishan, and that's a story that is interconnected because it's always 2015 reaches to the historical date for us where we all met. And we met. I came to the Congress that Marius Krishan was organizing. Bill Hughes was there as a guest speaker, and I remember that you were chairing my session, and I was terrified for these 5 minutes because later on I got to know you and I stopped being terrified. But Hans de Roos was there as well, and that's how Hans and I met as well. So that's at the very start of how the Children of the Night idea started to spring from. So we have roots in there, and we as long as we are around, we're going to be inviting the two of you to join our congresses and other events. And basically, we love you. So passing the microphone to Phil.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Magda. Let me just say at the beginning, I am delighted to be back again in Romania, the first time for quite a few years, thanks to that cursed pandemic. I'm also delighted to be among true friends, whether they be physically here or internationally present online. My paper today is called A Pathology of the Undead, Maladies of the Modern Vampire. And this will appear in print probably next year, but you heard it here first. That's the way I'm putting it. So I'll give you a quick scenario of what it... first of all, I'll be talking about osmosis and the undead, which is actually concerns the shaping, as it were, of transmission and disease through those things which are involved in the vampire's bite, for want of a better word. I'll then look at being vampire becoming human, which concerns the effect that vampires may have on humans and humans may affect on vampires, hence my phrase about osmosis, that transference between substances. Finally, I'm looking at diabetes and the undead, a very human complaint, but rather a difficult thing for the vampiric persons to cope with. And then I'll do a quick conclusion. This should take around about 40-45 minutes, and I do apologize, I do tend to lecture standing up, so those of you who are sort of given nausea by movement will probably suffer badly in the next 40 minutes or so. So to begin, osmosis and the undead. The vampire is a pathological problem. That problem is vested both in the nutritive peculiarity of its distinctive pathology and through a conventional medical process of contagion by way of intimate contact, extends also to the profound changes which the act of vampirism imposes upon those who might be variously termed its sustenance or its victims. At the point at which it intervenes into the economy of the body, the vampire compromises the integrity of its human counterpart, variously reducing its substance or its vitality, imposing dramatic changes upon its appearance or its ostensibly innate moral identity, and pulling it inexorably towards a form of pathological congruence with its fatal other. The vampire's victim is doomed conventionally, if not to actually become a vampire following the cessation of bodily life, then to progressively resemble its parasitical counterpart as personal corporeal health deteriorates. In its submission to, or else transition into vampirism, the human body becomes pale, listless, and possibly morally suspect in its desire to attain the very substance that it increasingly lacks. The anthropocentric nature of both vampire folklore and vampire fiction underwrites indeed an enduring epistemological convention that contemplates the pathology of vampirism not through the body of the vampire itself, but rather by way of the corresponding pathology of its victim, that is, through an ostensibly conventional human body, now rendered both strange and contagious, following contact with what is essentially an unknown pathogen. Now, this essentially anthropocentric vision of a vampire, which drains the human of its substance whilst replicating itself qualitatively in the quantitatively absent space thus created, is a misleading one, however. At first sight, it seems to be little more than a simple matter of a monodirectional transfer of substance, and through substance of vitality, from the donor body to that of the recipient. Hence, in 18th century accounts of vampire epidemics and 19th century fictions, the vampire grows ruddy and gains in bodily substance as the victim becomes pale and physiologically debilitated. In fiction, though, it's common to also find that as the victim loses bodily substance, it comes to express something akin to the vampire's desire, its sanguine morality, as it were, as well as manifesting a semblance of the pallid undead physiology. Clearly, those individuals who lose blood through conventional bodily traumas such as menorrhagia or exsanguination consequent upon physical injury do not usually manifest any desire to drink the blood of lovers or relatives or predate upon pauper children playing in the park one night. It is the specific intervention of the vampire that motivates such things in fiction rather than any conventional pathology of blood loss. This situation may perhaps be most evocatively summarized by Stoker's habitually materialist physician, Dr. John Seward, who contends in Dracula that the physical and emotional changes exhibited by Mina Harker, the final documented victim of the Count, are a direct consequence, not of any occult influence, but a product of, and I quote, that horrid poison that has got into her veins. Seward's pointed emphasis upon Mina's veins here is significant. Mina has most recently been forced to drink the Count's own blood in a violent encounter, which, whilst physically suggestive of fellatio, is contextualized by a ritual intonation. And I quote, "And you are now to me flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, kin of my kin," or in your case, kin of my other kin. That explicitly aligns the act with marital, familial, and feudal obedience. As she admits, she is forced, I quote, "to swallow," that is, to ingest, a literal as well as symbolic secretion of the Count's abnormal physiology. Now, for all its evident symbolism, however, this incident is premised upon a physiologically conventional act of ingestion by way of the musculo-membranous alimentary canal, which connects the mouth first to the stomach and then to the digestive and excretory system. Through contaminants, for example, intoxicants such as alcohol or macerated opiates, and poisons such as cadaveric alkaloids may reach the bloodstream by this route. It's unequivocally stated in Dracula that the Count had previously established hegemony over Mina by drinking her blood. This intervention into the arterial and venous circulation of the blood is similarly the singular route by which the Count initiated his control over Mina's former pupil, Lucy Westenra. You know, we remember the scene in which her hands come, as it were, in the case of Mina, pushing the coffin lid, but Lucy rips up the letter in the bedroom. There is no reference in Dracula, though, to Lucy having drunk the vampire's blood as Mina did. They are both victims of a bite. As a consequence of the Count's having bitten them, both women manifest physical behaviors which illustrate the vampire's ability to manipulate their bodies at a distance. As I've just said a moment ago, Lucy attempting to destroy the incriminatory letter, the paperwork that describes the wolf coming through the window, and Mina's tongue-tied silence, which prevents her from assisting the pursuers of her oppressor in any practical way. As a consequence of the Count's repeated attentions, Lucy and Mina progressively exhibit the physical characteristics of the vampire. And though the increasing pallor of their skin and gums may be indicative of chlorosis or a hemorrhagic anemia associated with a catastrophic depletion of blood, the perceptible elongation of their teeth, or the withdrawal of their gums perhaps, indicates that a pathogen akin to Seward's, I quote, "horrid poison," has indeed prompted a physiological as well as a moral change. This is a change considerably more radical than the mere retraction of the gums due to material wastage, as perceived by the purblind steward. He sees the gums, not the teeth. As Van Helsing makes clear, it is the teeth themselves that undergo radical change in the form of a progressive extension and perceptible sharpening. Mina's canine teeth indeed function as an index of her worsening condition. Van Helsing is clear that, I quote, "so long as they do not begin to sharpen, there is no active danger of a change in her." Seward's horrid poison is thus not the orally ingested blood of the vampire, but rather a somewhat more mysterious, more elusive substance, subtly conveyed by the vampire's bite, something that flows from vampire to victim, a contaminant, a virus, a pathogen, with implications for the body which receives it during the act of sanguine extraction and transfer. This, of course, is a conclusion premised upon the innate anthropocentrism that conditions human medicine, underlined by the characteristically unsympathetic presentation of the fictional vampire from Byron's Giaour through Polidori's Lord Ruthven to Stoker's Count Dracula. To return to near-contemporary fiction, though, it should be noted that Stephanie Meyer is particularly explicit in her insistence that it is, I quote, "the venom coating the vampire's teeth," rather than any occult agency, that initiates the organic transformation of mortal human flesh to enduring vampire substance. And that's the quotation you'll find at the bottom of the screen at the moment. The development in the 20th and 21st century of what might be considered vampirocentric fictions rather than anthropocentric fictions, that is, those texts where the vampire's narrative may be said to predominate over those of its human counterparts, however, facilitates an unprecedented perspective, wherein the mutable health and viability of the vampire become the center of pathological interest. So we move now from that introduction to being vampire, becoming human. In his magisterial study, The Vampire, A New History, Nick Groom rightly asserts that the vampire is, I quote, a figure that questions the very being of what it is to be human. If the conceptual possibility of osmosis between vampire and victim is as tenable as both Stoker and Mayer appear to suggest, then it is surely possible to project a similarly reciprocal relationship, coded in and transmitted through the sanguine comestible, that may impact with corresponding force upon the blood drinker. In other words, it is not just drinking blood that makes humans weak and vampires strong. Maybe consuming that blood may have a corresponding effect upon the vampire body itself. Not the body politic, but maybe the body vampiric. On the most basic level, this reciprocal relationship is encoded not merely in the nutritive content, which, as in Dracula, revitalizes the physical vigor of the vampire or temporarily renews its youthful appearance, but in the perverse effect that human blood may have upon vampiric physiology when its substance is also host to a subtle contaminant. The vampire has evolved considerably beyond its earliest incarnations as a reanimated and shambling cadaver, and in contemporary fiction it would seem to manifest its peculiar pathology as often in a conventionally living body as an uncanny and dead one. This increasingly common motif in 20th and 21st century vampire fiction has significant implications for the nature and definition of vampiric pathology. Whilst blood seemingly retains its nutritive status in the individual body, the individual bodily economy, of the vampire, its consumption by the living rather than the undead emphasizes its secular value over and above those earlier occult associations which linked it to a transformation from one condition of spiritual existence to another. If human blood is nothing more than substance, and a substance that may be extracted and traded much like any other body part in a commercial surgical economy, then it is surely evident that it may at times enter the individual economy, the bodily economy, with the deleterious qualities of a contaminant rather than the sustaining benefits of a foodstuff, and that it may harbor chemical properties which may compromise as much as sustain the consumer of that blood. Now, the American author Poppy Z. Bright was among the first to interrogate the possibilities of what I would term sanguine reciprocity in her radical and revisionist queer vampire novel Lost Souls of 1992. Now, in this important work, blood retains its comestible function in the vampiric diet, though its nutritive value is, however, subject to organic laws of spoilage analogous to those which underpin the conventional human diet. We don't eat bad food. We don't eat food that's gone off or food that's tainted because it makes us ill. Bright's vampires, in effect, may on occasion suffer something akin to food poisoning, a temporary debilitation evidenced by physiological symptoms of nausea and evacuation as a consequence of ingesting a blood-borne toxin or a blood-contained pathogen. This reaction might be immediate, an abject and involuntary rejection of a substance but partially injected, vomiting basically, as the ironically named vampire Christian discovers when he attempts to drink from an elderly man who has been stalking him. The blood that Christian had anticipated with explicit, and I quote the word, lust, I quote, was bitter. It was foul, and he spat it back against Wallace's throat and gagged. Christian's nostrils flared. He had not detected it before under the stinging mist of whiskey and sorrow. But now it was obvious, strong, and rank. The smell of sickness, deep, rotting sickness that rioted through Wallace's body, as wet and brown as the smell of the river. Some virulent disease, probably a cancer. The taste was corruption in his mouth. Now, on a subsequent occasion, 4 other vampires drained the same man, ignoring both the smell and the taste of his fatal disorder. They too gag and retch, vomit the toxic organic matter which they've incautiously and gluttonously consumed, experience sweats and nausea. These being, as Christian suggests, all the symptoms which might be associated with a 48-hour bout of conventional food poisoning. Now, in both of these encounters, the occult freighting of blood as the conventional channel through which vampirism is initiated within the victim is secondary to the substance's gustatory value in a nutritive bodily economy. For Bright's vampires, blood is but one of many substances which a vampire may consume as much for sensual pleasure as for actual sustenance. Whilst Christian, an older vampire, necessarily inclines towards an exclusively sanguine diet. He vomits violently, for example. I quote, his throat bitter, his eyes hot and streaming when drinking chartreuse. His ostensibly youthful companions mimic humanity in their omnivorous tastes. Where Christian did not need food, he did not go out drinking in particular. The younger vampires, Molokai, Twig, and Zilla, drank incessantly, even ate. They drowned their true natures in gluttony. But they were young. They were of a younger generation. Their chemistry was subtly different. They were hardier. Their organs, perhaps, more thick-walled, less delicate. To vampires such as these, as Christian remarks, I quote, blood is just another path to drunken gratification. Sorry, I'll bring that in a moment. This perceptible change in the gustative tolerance of the vampiric body notably extends the taste of the young beyond the wholesome but often relatively bland comestibles which government medical advisors and health food gurus alike approve for modern humanity, and into the irresponsible and excessive consumption of what Zilla terms, I quote, are poisons: alcohol, candy, chocolate, cakes. Those preservative and pleasure-rich junk foods which delight the senses but allegedly impair the mind and bloat the body with sugary excess. Christian's seeming nostalgia for a departed, quotes, true vampire nature, however, obscure the prime cause of this apparently progressive, or more accurately, regressive change in the substance and behavior of the vampire as a species. As Lost Souls makes very clear on more than one occasion, vampires, in Bright's book, are not undead. They're not revenants derived from former human beings, but rather they are, I quote, separate races that were close enough to mate, but still as far away from each other as dusk from dawn. It's the donkey and the horse, the zebra and the pony. The term species might perhaps prove more satisfactory than races here. But where the birth of a conventional human being, when properly managed, should result in the survival of both mother and child, the offspring of a vampire, whether this latter be born of a vampiric or mortal mother, will invariably eat its way out of the matrix, killing one of its parents in consequence. Vampires know this. And so female vampires are characteristically uninclined towards fatal parenthood. When a human mother unwittingly conceives a child from a vampire father, therefore a hybrid is created through sexuality, part human, part vampire, a dilution or degeneration of the former purity of species or of race. This deterioration is amply exhibited in both the advantages and the disadvantages employed by Zilla, Molokai, and Twig, who, I quote, wished they had fangs, but had to make do with teeth they filed sharp, though they, I quote again, could walk in sunlight as their great-grandfathers could not. Bright's queer narrative, in which the only sex that is both safe and satisfying is oral sex, and is conducted between members of the same physical gender, ensheathes essentially the same racial narrative which Foucault exposes in La Volonté de Savoir, where blood is precarious as well as powerful, being too readily mixed, capable of being quickly consumed. Bright's vampires quite simply have entered an entropic biological spiral. Already capable of walking undetected amidst a modern humanity populated, I quote, by all of the lost children who began their lives at night, the goths, the punks, the queers. Their destiny is assimilation, almost to the point of absorption, the eclipse of discrete species identity. By the end of the narrative, the 3 survivors of the original 5 vampires of lost souls relax after performing in a snuff rock gig in a recognizable New Orleans nightclub some 50 years after the main action of the novel. Their self-inflicted wounds, which they whip each other with barbed cables, heal with miraculous rapidity, and they enjoy an indeterminate longevity. But they drink their daily blood, rich and sweet, from a hypodermic rather than from a donor body. They're clearly being very careful where they get their supplies from. Now, the necessity of securing a regular and uncontaminated supply of blood rather than relying solely upon chance encounters with individuals would appear to have become a preoccupation for those fictional vampires active in the post-AIDS world. Though Bright's Lost Souls makes no explicit reference to AIDS, and indeed dwells extensively on occasionally visceral incidences of oral sexuality, eroticized biting, casual heroin use, unprotected sex, and blood drinking, other authors appear to have addressed the perilous nature of bodily fluids, of human bodily fluids, even where the potential transmissibility of immunodeficiency disorders is never mentioned explicitly. It is notable in particular how many vampires seek administrative, caretaking, or invasive work within medical facilities or blood banks, or else in other occupations where blades and needles might be wielded without question, even after dark. In the words of Pat Khalifa's Iduna, addressed to the vampire Kerry, these are those, I quote, places where you can handle blood or blood products. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Handle blood or blood products. These places are favoured by fictional vampires as much for their anonymity as their necessarily imposed privacy. As the vampire narrator of Renee M. Charles's Cinnamon Roses, 1994, intimates to her reader, come on. Do you think those ER nurses on the graveyard shift keep messing your veins by accident? Or those dental technicians can't clean your teeth without drawing blood? While blood banks, with their screening processes and facilities for hygienic preservation and storage, are featured in vampire fiction, some authors have developed further the notion of the vampire as a supreme predator by imagining situations in which humans are variously bred or else systematically farmed for their blood. The eponymous and short-lived heroine of Lucius Shepard's The Golden, 1993, for example, has been bred solely for the singular bouquet of her blood that is conveniently circulating within an aesthetically pleasing female body. She's displayed and sniffed. Other repositories of sanguine substance are, however, somewhat less decorative. And in Andrew Fox's Fat White Vampire Blues, 2003, most notably, the luridly named, and I think this is a wonderful title, High Crew of Vlad Tepes, maintains a secret clinical facility within its protected compound in New Orleans, which is to be found, I quote, a long, wide, open ward lined with 4 rows of narrow cast iron beds, which were covered with simple white starch sheets. The human inmates of this battery farm appear oddly cow-like and are indeed referenced continuously as livestock by the crew. They are, in fact, the descendants of the mentally disabled inmates of a closed charitable asylum once run by a group of nuns, and their substance is seemingly consumed by way of extractive machinery without detriment to the physical or mental health of the undead consumer. That was rather strange. I will point out this at this point, I had never come across this wonderful novel but for Gillian Wingfield, who's the only person who's ever written about it at length. Her PhD has a massively important statement about this book in there, and I think it's, if you've it hopefully will be appearing in print, but in the meantime, it is worth reading as a document and as a piece of magnificent research, in my opinion. Anyway, to the next section. Diabetes and the undead. Jules Duchamp, the New Orleans vampire who visits the facility, is at first rather confused by why it has been set up. The vampire walks into this room full of beds and passive patients and wires and extractive machinery, and he's looking around. What on earth is going on? He is, after all, actively engaged himself in predating upon the African-American community of a racially diverse city, a wonderfully racially diverse city, in which an impenetrable anonymity may be obtained simply by wearing a Mardi Gras disguise. Anybody can be anybody they want in New Orleans. Try it. Addressing an obviously European member of Vlad Tepes's crew, and Vlad Tepes is not present, I might add, it's just a name, Duchamp finally comprehends what on earth is happening in this clinical room. You mean to tell me you breed them for their blood? Well, of course. Why else would we house and feed more than 200 imbeciles? We carefully control their diets, feeding the proper nutrients to ensure that their blood is balanced and healthful. Thus, the blood that we consume is considerably superior to that obtained from random victims, especially those from the New Orleans area. He glanced condescendingly at Jules's more than ample gut. Riley smiled. The healthful balance of the blood is pertinent to the well-being of the vampire rather than that of the unknowing donor, a priority which is very much emphasized when the obese physique of the slovenly dressed Jules Duchamp is juxtaposed with that of the expensively besuited speaker, Georges Beshoff, who enjoys, I quote, the sleek shape and well-defined musculature of an Olympic swimming champion. Clearly, in Fox's novel, where the undead are converted from the living, vampire bodies are physiologically mutable and subject to the weight-inducing effects of gluttony, even though they appear to retain that unaging longevity. The diet of the New Orleans area, as Besthoff indicates, is hardly a healthy one. In any case, the wonderfully named Maureen Remoulard, the unequivocally fleshy and double-dimpled vampire who converts Duchamp. Her surname, incidentally, indicates or indexes a calorific and piquant sauce. Maureen Remoulard echoes Besthoff in recommending that her counterpart, Jules Duchamp, refrain from draining, I quote, colored victims because of what their blood might do to his physical condition. Of course, this is a reflection of the culture that Fox is describing rather than the opinion of anybody in this room. Well, how do you think you got so damn fat in the first place? Me, I've been a vampire twice as long as you have, so I've had a lot more time to earn my blubber. But you've always preferred the colored victims, always said they were tastier. Do you know what those people eat? Fatback, pig's knuckles. They fry their vegetables for Varney's sake. You want to slim down? If you do, if you really honestly do, then this, and this is a demand from a black vampire that Duchamp cease draining black victims, is the best thing that could have happened to you. As the reader comes to fully understand, Duchamp indeed has a liking for the larger lady, and there is something undeniably fetishistic in his gleeful forcing of excessively calorific food into his most recent black victim, Bessie, I quote, a big-boned woman, harvested from a Pontchartrain soup kitchen, for whom he orders, I quote, an oyster po' boy with a helping of red beans and smoked sausage and a side of cornbread. I could cope with that myself. The sandwich oozingly dressed at her own request with tartar sauce and mayonnaise and tomatoes and pickles. Once released from its interior circulation, I quote again, her blood was manna, caviar, ambrosia. Oh, the incredible richness But in the aftermath of its consumption, as Duchamp struggles to support his bulk on his aching limbs, the D word flashed through his brain. Diet! As much as he hated to think it, it wouldn't go away. His damn knees kept reminding him, for the sake of his health, he had to lose some weight. Duchamp's weight, which impairs his ability to move and which is also implicitly linked to his sedentary occupation as a New Orleans nighttime taxi driver, is the most prominent symptom of an underlying pathological problem. The richness of the blood he habitually drinks has generated a more profound issue within his circulation, however, or so he believes. Prior to his taking up his career as a taxi driver, Duchamp was employed as an assistant by the city coroner, another good job for a vampire, Dr. Landrieu, who had, I quote, fed him the blood of the recently deceased for 30 years to frustrate his desire to kill, and in the hope, as he tells Duchamp, that he might find a cure for your vampirism. This noble aim, though, exceeds the skill of the good doctor and is scaled back ultimately to a more modest ambition. Landrieu tells Duchamp that having failed to find a cure that might regulate his desire to a desire that's fatal to the vampire's human victims, that he's begun to investigate whether an understanding of the chemistry of the undead might unlock the key to mortal complaints, such as diabetes, that have been accurately otherwise associated with unhealthy lifestyles. Diabetes, indeed, is the reason Duchamp visits Landrieu some years, decades indeed, following the end of his employment at the morgue. It is not the aching limbs and shortness of breath which concern the obese vampire, but rather the other symptoms which he confides to this apparent specialist in the disorders which may ostensibly affect the vitality of the undead. So Duchamp tells the doctor, well, I'm thirsty a lot more often than I used to be. Some nights I'm thirsty all the time, and sometimes right after I feed, my heart goes all nutso and my vision gets blurry. I've been reading articles about diabetes in Modern Maturity, so I figure I sort of know what I'm talking about. Thirst and blurred visions are indeed amongst the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, that variant of the condition which is popularly associated with lifestyle as well as genetic heredity. Obesity likewise can trigger the onset of type 2 diabetes in some cases, as can sedentary habits. Red meats and processed or salt-rich foods such as sausages are further potential irritants to a diabetic constitution. Hunger and weariness are again common symptoms. While Duchamp does not himself habitually consume solid food, though he does indulge a taste for strong coffee, which itself might contribute to the heart symptoms he experiences, his diet is derived from those mortals who are themselves most at risk from developing type 2 diabetes. Indeed, as he reminds himself, half the population of New Orleans over the age of 40 had it, diabetes, and Jules went well past 40. Duchamp, in other words, has good reason to believe that he may suffer a vampiric variant of type 2 diabetes, and it probably comes as no surprise that it is the doctor's diagnosis following the administration of a series of what appear to be quite conventional blood tests. Landrieu advises Duchamp, it's as I expected. You're suffering from the beginning stages of a condition analogous to adult onset diabetes mellitus. Fortunately for you, since we've caught it early and little permanent degeneration has occurred, my experimental compound should prove very effective in staving off further symptoms. Aha, we have a mad doctor. Diabetes, whatever the type, is an incurable condition, though its effects can be controlled or ameliorated to a certain extent depending on the patient through medication or diet. Vampirism, it would appear, is likewise a condition to be endured without hope of ultimate relief. The suggestion, therefore, is that Landrieu may have formulated a treatment, well, namely, I quote, a drug that, if it's effective, you'll need to take every day for the rest of your life, and in the manner of insulin. Even if it's unlikely to ease the physical pressure of his gross weight, it will still condition his existence. And Landrieu provides Duchamp with an experimental 15-dose regime comprising a small round white tablet which had the letter A engraved on it, to be taken twice daily. This tablet superficially resembles metformin, a prescription drug which is commonly used to treat diabetes. Unfortunately for Duchamp, however, the doctor is murdered before the treatment proceeds beyond the experimental stage. There is, however, an intriguing and ironic code to this story of conventional blood disorders played out in an unconventional body. Duchamp's pathology, though manifested in the body, would appear to be centered upon his mind, or more accurately, the relationship of his mind to his body, and the fragile state of his self-perception. As Doodlebug, Duchamp's erstwhile partner in a wartime crime-busting superhero duo suggests to him, following several unsuccessful attempts at cross-species transformation. Somewhere along the road, you got used to the notion of Jules Duchamp as obese and clumsy, and you got comfortable with that. I think your wolf belly drags the ground because you believe it should, and that your bat can't fly because you believe it shouldn't. While Duchamp immediately dismisses Doodlebug's diagnosis as psychobabble, the younger vampire practically proves that such profound changes are possible by cajoling the obese revenant into participating in a camp reenactment of Gene Kelly and Sid Charisse's 1952 Broadway ballet, during which his hitherto expansive waistline reduces to a svelte 30 inches. Wish I could do that to mine. From this point, I quote, he'd always remember that his dreams, if given half a chance, could be stronger than his doubts. Those doubts are, withal, profound and chronic, a situation in which Duchamp's doctor appears to be aware, and which he seeks to overcome by the simple expedient of prescribing a placebo in place of the supposed medication. It is only at the point at which Duchamp achieves control over his external physique and reasserts the vampire prerogatives of physical mutability and superhuman strength that the miracle drug is revealed by another doctor to be nothing more than aspirin. Ordinary, generic, table aspirin. Having finally made a successful cross-species transformation into a non-obese form under the guidance of the attendant Doodlebug, Duchamp finally comprehends that it wasn't the pills at all. It was me. It's always been me. Everything Doodlebug had tried to convince him of was true. Jules had only been transforming into a wolf with a barrel belly because that was the only kind of wolf he believed he could become. He hadn't flown in years because he'd lost faith in his ability to leave the ground. He'd suffered from aches and pains and shortness of breath for decades, all because an unending stream of newspaper articles and TV shows had told him that a person of his size had to suffer these things. Vampiric disabilities and human infirmities are thus imbricated in Duchamp's sudden comprehension of a self-perceived frailty needlessly perpetuated. And the point is emphasized a second time in the novel's 2004 sequel, Bride of the Fat White Vampire, as well. From this point, I quote, his form and his fate were in his own hands. Duchamp is less a victim of biology than he is of psychology. As a hypochondriac, beset by psychosomatic symptoms, he emblematizes another all-too-human vulnerability, that of being defined and determined by self-diagnosis undertaken in the context of popular medical mythologies and the promises of relief proffered by the vendors of corrective nostrums. The tablet is to Jules Duchamp what the magic feather is to Walt Disney's Dumbo. Only by separating his vampire nature from the persona through which he assimilates himself into the company of his mortal and obese victims can Duchamp be effectively, I quote, cured of a range of human complaints which have no relevance to, no actual consequences for his physical actuality. And so I move to my conclusion. Illness is a state of mind. One vampire's blood is another vampire's poison. This statement, as it were, may serve to sum up the whole paradox of literary vampirism in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. With the rise of a modern tradition of narratives which address the human form from the viewpoint of the vampire, or which else otherwise prioritize the latter over the former, the relationship between those who drink blood and those who are the source of that blood has become considerably more complicated, and its ethics more relative, more convoluted, and withal more questionable. Where a fictional vampire might once have been implicitly and routinely condemned for taking blood on account of the effect, be it physiological or moral, that their actions might have upon the donor, the tenor of fiction written during and following the 20th century fin de siècle would seem increasingly to point towards the eclipse of anthropocentrism and to the rise of an emphasis that favors the sanguinarian over its victim. Under this revised perspective, it is the human that constitutes the infecting or contaminating other. Vampires are becoming sick because humanity is sick. Because human blood, unless properly farmed, regulated, or guaranteed, poses a risk not merely to individual viability, but also to the integrity of the species. A degree of quality control, it would appear, is now necessary because of the ever closer relationship that pertains between what were hitherto separate species. That ever closer relationship, however, runs far deeper than the adoption by vampires of human paradigms in industry or the deployment of human technology in the extraction and transfer of blood. Vampires are becoming sick because they've become to resemble the human culturally as well as physically, and because they have taken on, to a greater or a lesser extent, debilitating human ailments and those human characteristics associated with a mortally fragile rather than uncannily durable physiology. If this change in bodily pathology were not sufficient in itself, it would appear that the vampires are also coming to embody many of the psychological characteristics of modern Western humanity. As well as falling victim to hypochondria, they are becoming subject to and increasingly tend to express the rhetoric of individual and collective guilt, the bodily symptoms of angst and despair, and the disorientation which may be felt when the wildness of individual desire and the necessity of conformity within cultural mores come into conflict. Blood, needless to say, is the pivot around which the spiral of pathological uncertainty revolves. Whilst the act of ingesting blood still appears to produce analogous and unfeigned reactions of excitement, desire, and fulfillment in seemingly all fictional vampires, it is the personal choice as to whether blood ought to be consumed that perplexes so many of the modern undead. The reluctance to drink human blood, which may be traced back to the timorous figure of Louis de Pont du Lac in Anne Rice's interview with the vampire in 1976, implicitly raises the question as to whether a vampire who has eschewed the substance may be considered to be a vampire at all. By appropriating guilt to the necessary act of feeding, and in initiating a process whereby human blood becomes distasteful and may therefore be justifiably replaced with substitutes such as plasma, animal products, or synthetic equivalents, modern vampire fiction has begun to undermine both the practice and the substance through which the vampire has been customarily and historically defined. In consequence, the vampire is now enmeshed in a civil war of fundamental identity, and this existential crisis is perhaps the greatest malady that has beset the species over the past 30 or so years. The prognosis, at least for the foreseeable future, remains uncertain. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was a very extensive collection of literature. I loved it, that you referred to so many vampire texts here. That was, as always, brilliant. Thank you so much for this feast for our ears here. So let me just start the discussion. If we have some questions or if someone wants to comment, please do. Okay, well, anyone? Either from Zoom or from the room wants to comment on anything?
Yeah, I'm unmuting, and I would like to share your words. I'm so happy to see William back in our conference and even being present in Romania. And I very much enjoyed your presentation, not only the content and the ideas, but also the way you presented it. Makes it very exciting and very convincing what you are presenting here. All the time while you were talking, I was having one thought at the back of my head. My first impression about sick vampires, and I don't know if you skipped it on purpose or how you would place it in the whole of your narrative. the movie by Andy Warhol, Blood for Dracula, with Udo Kier. I also think that that would be a perfect example of a vampire who's getting sick, who is so sick he cannot travel anymore and has to be brought by Anton to a more healthy surrounding and hopes finally to get the virgin blood that will restore his health, only to learn, of course, that the virgins are no more virgins. Is this a story that you also considered in developing your view of the healthy and the sick vampire?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's good to see you again, Hansel, friend. But yeah, I mean, there just wasn't enough space to put it in, and it would have left me at the risk of sort of trying to show some graphics. And I don't trust technology anymore, I'm afraid. But no, you're quite right. I mean, there are several others. I mean, there's The Sick Vampire goes back quite a way. There's a novel, and I can't remember the author's name, but it's called Children of the Night, which is set partly in post-Ceausescu Romania. And that has, yes, and he's got we have the tales of blood and iron. And, you know, Vlad Tepes himself is lying there in bed thinking, I want to die. I'm feeling so sick. I'm feeling so lousy. By the end of it, he thinks everybody else is doing such a bad job of it. I think I might get back on my feet again and be I'm going to say human, but be vampire again. The sick vampire image it's got. I mean, in a sense, vampires are always sick because they're always lacking. It's when it's when they become sick because of the human rather than because of the lack of human. Become sick because of plenitude rather than absence that changes the whole nature of that relationship. In a way, we're getting to a sort of stage where the human victims of vampires, rather like packets of cigarettes, need health warnings printed down their sides to warn the vampire not to have too many or not to give them to under 16s or something similar. I hope that sort of helps it. There's a hand raised at the back. Thank you, Hansel, friend, for your comment. But I agree, that is the Warhol is definitely a text.
Thank you, Hans. I'll just pass the microphone to Phil here.
Thanks, Bill. You started off with an almost biblical quote, if not direct quote, flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. And as you went through your presentation, and thank you for it, I couldn't help but think, and this is an out of the blue comment, which you may or not be able to answer, I couldn't help but think the parallel to transubstantiation of the Mass. And that was all the way through. If not, Tracy in 1999 said that the Australian Catholic religion had died and spirituality was dead. I mean, that there seems to be a very strong parallel to what you were quoting, what you were saying.
Yeah, I take that absolutely. I mean, Stoker, as an Irish Protestant, was acutely aware of these sacerdotal differences between his nominal Anglicanism and the Roman Catholicism of the majority population of the country. And in actual fact, of course, he'd worked at one stage out in the west coast of Ireland, which was incredibly Catholic at the time, and partly almost in places not even English speaking. What I find intriguing is, of course, I mean, my approach tends to be secular in the sense that I work from a medical background. I am a frustrated clinician, I'm afraid. The reason I never practiced medicine is I just cannot count. Therefore, I would be dangerous if I gave a prescription to anybody. Goodness knows what you'd get. But at the same time, I've always loved the rhetoric of medicine, the arguments of medicine, and the fact, of course, that medicine, as Foucault would point out, and you'll agree with me straight away, is not a level discourse, is not a neutral discourse. It's a heavily politicized, heavily gendered, heavily racist form of communication. And I think an ableist one as well, which is to bring in paperwork that we're looking at on other occasions. In a way, of course, what we do with this sort of medical aspect is our earlier writers critics writing about Stoker, I think, picked up on it on the religious aspect. There are quite a few who brought in. Victor Sage is one of them in horror fiction and the Protestant tradition, who talks about the Eucharist and talks about the whole nature of real bodies and consuming real bodies. The vampires here never suggest that they want to consume souls, and in this sense, they're rather like Stoker's Renfield. You know, Seward says to Renfield, what would you think about having an elephant's soul? And Renfield says, I don't want a soul. I just want blood. I just want substance. I just want, I want to consume, because life is good and life is rich and life is something to take. Renfield is a secularist. Dracula is like a quack doctor who plays on his secularism. I'll give you this, and if you have this, you'll be like a god, and you can have all the blood and all the substance and all the life as you like. He's not actually a blood drink, he's a blood eater. He eats the birds, he eats the flies, he eats the spiders. But Dracula is like a vendor of quack medicines, for the blood is the life, is actually the rather wonderfully named Hughes's blood pills, no relation of mine, I might add. I'd get them wrong if I had to just prescribe those. But there is one of those sort of nominal natures there that the Count plays people at their own game. He gives drink to the thirsty, alcohol. He gives promises to the desperate. And he gives taunts to those he wants, in a sense. I think the Count wants them to chase him. I think he wants them to chase him so he can deal with them. But they're faster. They're more organized. They're collective. He can split into specks of moonlight or thousands of rats or whatever he wants to split into. But they aren't split. The group that chases Dracula are unified. Anyway, sorry about that. Okay. Thank you very much. Good, brilliant point.
Thank you very much, Phil. And over to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Fantastic presentation. Just a continuation on what was just said. In my master ontology, I was actually talking about separating different types and kinds of vampires, specifically for this reason. And I thought of the Catholic Mass in particular, with this is the blood of Jesus Christ. And partaking in that. And it's like, well, technically that would be a form of vampirism, but yet the church doesn't see it that way. So it's funny how they have these hypocritical definitions and like deplorable versus like ethical blood drinking. And I'm glad you brought that up in that. I just wanted to,
that's an intriguing thing. I mean, the point about cannibalism in the Mass is been raised years and years back. I mean, we're talking about centuries back by the Protestant reformers. And Victor Sage quotes it in Horror Fiction in the Protestant Tradition. I cannot remember which Protestant divine it is, but one of them talks about the actual nature of transubstantiation and then says with a sort of rather horrified gleefulness, so when the disciples took the wine and ate the bread, they were eating that which was still living. And you can almost hear the sort of gleeful subversion that's in it. Now, I don't know whether this is true. I'm not Roman Catholic, so I can't speak with authority on this, but I do. Is it true that in Roman Catholicism, the blood is reserved or the wine is reserved for the priest and the laity get the bread? Is that true? So in that particular case, of course, they can't be vampires. They can be cannibals. Ah, right. I didn't know that, because I mean I know in the Protestant tradition you get both. The only part of the Protestant tradition that never gives you the wine is the Salvation Army. Yeah, right. Okay, I'm glad you told me that. Yeah. I'll just say this for the benefit of those who couldn't quite hear it, because I've got the microphone in my hand. What Peter was saying there was that the exclusivity of consuming the wine, the priest consumes the wine in the regular service, indicates a sort of form of exclusivity, aristocracy, elite, and so on and so forth. But it also makes the priest somehow much more intimate to the deity than the laity. The laity get half. The deity goes to in its entirety, tiny amount. Okay, it's a sip, but it's still a tiny amount of blood and bone, blood and substance. Yeah. It's also, I mean, it's incredibly against Jewish law, because, of course, kosher rules in Judaism, you don't touch blood. And here, blood is being... What Christ said to the disciples would have been shocking in certain respects. This is my blood. This is my body. Yeah, that would be shocking to Orthodox Jewry. Not to Christianity, but to Orthodox Jewry, that would be almost blasphemous. But then again, he's just chased the money changers out of the temple. So good guy. Anybody else? I think it was, yes. I do think it was. I mean, you've also, I mean, it's amazing how vampire lifestyles get advertised. And I'm thinking of Lost Boys. You know, what's it? party all night, live forever. What's wrong with being a vampire? I can't remember the exact phrase, but there was something like that that almost turns vampirism into a sort of, buy this car and you'll pull all the girls, smoke this cigarette and you'll be the most sophisticated guy in the room, drink this whiskey and people will want to be you. There is an element of that in it. Our 18th century vampires, nobody wanted to be them because they were rotting corpses. On the other hand, once you start being urbane and walk around with a nice cloak on, as indeed some of us did last night, then it changes. It becomes a lifestyle choice, like eating too much fried food, like going to the bar to drink beer, like doing anything. It becomes a sudden sort of development, as it were, something to aspire to, something people want to make, you want to make people jealous with it, which is astonishing, really. Anybody else? Oh, hang on. Yuri just says yes.
Yes, no, here.
There he is.
We have a question over here. Locke Heiss wants to do a question. He was asking me if he should do it through the chat or unmute his microphone. So I think he's going to unmute his microphone.
Yeah, unmute by all means, old friend, unmute.
Good morning, afternoon. So
hello there.
This is Locke Heiss talking to you from New York, from the East Coast. I was fascinated by your comments about being a physician, because I happen to be a doctor also. And I was curious as to when you were doing your academics for being a medical doctor, was there a particular event that pulled you into the world of vampirology? I was hoping you could tell us, was there an inciting event, or how did you end up, in other words, how did you end up giving this wonderful talk today?
Right, I've misrepresented myself. I did not train as a medical doctor. I've been an enthusiast for medicine since probably my 12th or 13th year, when I managed to be thrown off a trampoline at school, landed on my head and ended up with a concussion, which put me in hospital for 2 days. Where everybody else sat in the hospital and recovered, I was keeping my eyes open. I was sketching equipment. I was writing down what doctors and surgeons were saying. I was observing the practices, and I followed that right the way through my school career. In actual fact, I did my PhD in English literature, though a fair chunk of the work, it was on Bram Stoker's work. The 4th chapter was an exclusively medical chapter. And I've always been interested in it. What brings it to me is that I started to realize that vampirism wasn't like how it appeared in films. When you read it in novels, it was a medical event. In films, it was all about sexuality and sensuality and touch and vision and sight. But when you read the novels, it was about getting pale. It was about lassitude. It was about symptoms being mistaken for other things. It's hysteria. It's anemia. It's chlorosis. It's menorrhagia, and so on and so forth. And I think one of the things about Gothic generically as a genre, as a vital force in particularly Victorian communication and right into the 20th century, is how many doctors there are. It's full of it. The whole, Van Helsing is a professor of law as well as a professor of medicine. He's a psychologist as well as a physiologist. But you've got Hesselius in Lefenu's In a Glass Darkly, who's a conventional physician. He's the German physician. His assistant, who writes up his notes, is the unnamed nationality, unnamed character physician who never quite made it into the profession. You've got all these other figures, Algernon Blackwood's John Silence, Dr. Taverner, Dr. Jekyll. Yeah, totally agree. All the way through these, why are doctors so involved in these things? And I think it's because there is a crisis of faith in spirituality, which then turns medicine into a type of faith, and then a fear that a faith cannot be founded upon the frailties of human indecision, human ethical failure, or just quite honestly, human stupidity. I hope that answers the question. But yeah, I mean, I am always pleased to speak with a member of the medical profession. It's to me the honourable profession that I always wish I'd joined. But perhaps it's probably better for the world.
You have joined in your own way, and I'd say that even though vampires and doctors may have different goals, I think in many ways they follow the same road. So in that sense, all of us here today are fellow travelers.
I agree totally, sir. I totally agree.
Thank you.
Over to Peter. Peter's got one. Thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick thought on the doctor. I mean, it's also worth noting one of the possible suspects for Jack the Ripper, I think, was a doctor. Yeah, Polish doctor. So, and of course, there's the whole potential, although I probably dismiss a lot of it myself, to link between Stoker and Jack the Ripper, but being that he might have been influenced by the Ripper, or he knew he was, but I don't. The evidence for that is nebulous. But yeah, but the point is, there's an interesting layer, but it goes into because you could use it to explore the dark sides of medicine as well. It's not just the light sides, like the Dr. Waldman, yeah, Frankenstein's mentor. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, getting onto that, I mean, doctors do work in the dark side. They work in the shadow side. As a curative profession, it's a profession that sometimes brings pain. Sometimes we have to damage to make safe. We have to remove a limb. We have to inflict pain. We have to temporarily disable to try and make wholeness. And I think that is part of the sort of perplexity. I mean, it takes us back to that whole notion that pharmacon is both medicine and poison simultaneously. But I mean, the Jack the Ripper question, the Whitechapel murder is an interesting. Of course, Stoker would have known about this. This was the great topic of conversation. Everybody was talking about, not just in Britain, in America, across the continent of Europe. This was the first media serial killer. Probably not the first serial killer, but certainly the first media serial killer, though it's probably more than one person involved in it. Did Stoker know about? He knew about the case, yes. I don't do conspiracy theories. I don't think it was the Prince of Wales's eldest son. I don't think it was anybody else doing some sort of systematic ritual killing. He's as likely to be any other nationality as Polish. He's as likely to be a butcher as a doctor. He's as likely to be an atheist, a Christian, as he would be a Jew, and so on. Kosminski was possibly one of the most reviled men at the time and probably had nothing to do with it. Neither did Neil Cream, who confessed to it just as he was being hanged, but was in the wrong place to have done the murders at the time. In any case, he was in prison. So it all ties in together. There's so many things that can cluster around Dracula in particular. You know, are the women in the room with Jonathan Harker, are they the dancing prostitutes at Oscar Wilde's trial? Is Dracula Wilde? Is he Irving? And so on and so forth. I mean, it's too easy to pour meaning into it. It's great fun. Don't get me wrong, it's great fun, but to make absolute meaning out of that, I think we end up in the realm of speculation. This is one of the reasons why I do medicine, because, well, at the end of the day, symptoms usually can direct you towards reason. There's pseudo symptoms, there's fake symptoms, but I think symptomatologies can direct us safely towards things that we can, at least in inverted commas, prove to the satisfaction of science at one point in its development, or secular science at one point in its development. Are there any more questions, Magda? Is there anything else coming through? Because I'm conscious of monopolizing the room and staying here till the middle of the night, and
no, nothing.
We've survived.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was fascinating, and thank you for the discussion as well. As always, well done, sir, and thank you everyone for participating. That's exactly the kind of a moment we are waiting for this conference. That was a feast for eyes and ears. Okay, let us pass to the next. We have a bit of a delay, and we are still struggling with technical problems here. So just give us a moment. And I'm so sorry, Mark. I can see that you've joined already and waiting for us. I really apologize for that. But okay, it's here. It's here. You're a genius. Okay. I was just going to buy you a nice beer later on. Thank you very much, because we lost the vision for a while, and we have Mark already. So if we can see, if you can, if you can work your magic and make the screen be invisible, all the speakers, that would be fantastic. Because we have our next keynote speaker in a moment. So our next speaker, I'm just going to jump right away to introducing our next keynote speaker, who's online in broadcasting from the UK. and Mark Olly. Hi, Mark. You've been very patient with us. Mark is a very interesting person whom I met in a completely different circumstances than the Dracula related. But I'm not going to reveal the details. But I'm going to talk about your career here. So for over 22 years, Mark worked as a professional musician, live DJ, compare and in the music and in the music management founding Angel Heart Music. Yes, am I correct?
A couple of my own companies.
Unicorn Entertainment Agency and Legend Thing Ltd, one of the first multimedia companies in the world, before moving on to pursue a solo career as a writer, archaeologist, and TV presenter. This career has so far taken him to all parts of the UK, France, Egypt, Norway, Italy, Bulgaria, Cyprus, South America, Turkey, Malta, and North Asia, in search of the ancient and the mysterious. He has 9 major books in print, appeared on Carlton Television, the History Detectives, wrote and presented all 3 seasons of ITV Granada's Award-nominated Lost Treasures Adventure Archaeology series, has presented for Sky History Channel and featured on popular US series Ancient Aliens. Writes, presents, directs, and has produced several music videos, occasionally appears in movies, and recently played sessions as drummer with bands South Path Sacred Wind, Wolf and Copperworm. That's interesting names, Mark. He's also a visiting lecturer at
interesting bands.
Wilmslow. Definitely. With Wilmslow Guild at the University of Chester, occasionally heads up his own archaeological unit and runs his own DVD production and props company, Mythco. So that's
it would have been far easier. It would have been far easier to just say writer, presenter, archaeologist. Okay.
Yeah, but where is the fun in that? So okay, so over to you, Mark, and please you can now tell us about everything you want to tell us.
Well, this is going to be a little bit different, because I can see there's a slight delay as well. We've also got a computer reflection there that I didn't anticipate. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably read some of the notes as we go through. It's if I put my hand up, you see.
Yeah,
there you are.
Yes,
that's the problem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Don't worry,
okay. Well, I'll give it the best. I'll give it the best shot I can. Hold on, I'm just readjusting so you get the whole frame. Okay. There we go. We'll see if we can get through this. Okay. There is a lot of writing in this, so I'll probably end up reading quite a lot of it. This is from a book called Gaia, George G.N. Byron, 1788 to 1824. It says this: "But first on earth as vampire sent, thy corpse shall from its tomb be rent, then ghastly haunt thy native place, and suck the blood of all thy race." Basically, I put this together for a group in Manchester, the Manchester Vampire Guild, who were interested in something that would appeal not just to specialists, but also to the general public. So as an archaeologist, I decided I was going to start where archaeology begins, which is right at the very beginning. So hopefully the beginning of this will have some information in that you guys might not already know. And it basically resulted in me coming up with this PowerPoint presentation, which is vampires, their history and development. There we go. It nearly looks like it's straight on there. Yeah, it's going to end up coming through looking like a Hammer horror movie, this, isn't it?
It does, but it's kind of fun, so just carry on.
Okay, we'll crack on with the with it as it is. Here we go. Okay. Some of the quotes hopefully you won't have heard before. This is in the beginning. Okay. "There was once a time when vampires were as common as blades of grass or berries in a pail, and they never kept still, but wandered round at night among the people. You might have heard that because that's from a Romanian folk tale. So you may be familiar with that quote. Let me just see if I can line this up a little bit.
We have a
Here we go.
Romanian lady here, and she's familiar with the quote, so she's smiling.
Ah, excellent. Excellent. And you're not actually seeing the full screen. I've just noticed that. Let me just see if I can increase the size of what you see, because you're missing a lot of the screen. There we go. That might help.
It looks very ghostly,
Yeah, the top of it.
like a projection from the outer
There we go. You
world.
see the top of it's disappearing. I'm just trying to make it so this works. Okay, ancient beliefs about life and death. Here we go. Some of the quotes from archaeological sources. The man whose corpse lieth in the desert, though I have often seen such a one. His spirit resteth not in the earth. That's probably the oldest quote that relates directly to the legends of vampires, because that's from the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh. It's about 7,200 years BC. So the idea, the concept of sort of an afterlife, if you like, has been around a tremendous amount of time, although it's more like life after life in that sense. Some of these you'll be familiar with. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. That's from the Bible, Old Testament, Leviticus, as a previous speaker pointed out. No doubt the Jews would have been horrified by the idea of communion. I am yesterday, today and tomorrow, and I have the power to be born a second time. That's the Egyptian Book of the Dead, coming forth by day. Now that I wander alone without my loved ones, and all my visions are but empty images, may the Buddhas exert the force of their compassion and stop the fear and hate-drawn terrors of the between. Okay, description of the between from Tibetan Buddhism. So as you can see already, pretty much the whole world and every culture has something that relates in one way or another to what we now know as vampires. Hang on, let me just, for some reason, I don't understand why that TV's slanted. Something's moved. Hold on. Hey, is that straightening up a bit? It is actually. At your end, it's
a little bit
evening
Star
up a
Wars
little bit.
style, but we can read it.
Okay, well, that's slightly better anyway. We can work with that. O friend and companion of night, thou who rejoicest in the baying of dogs and spilt blood, who wanderest in the midst of shades among the tombs, who longest for blood and brings terror to mortals, Gorgo Mormo thousand-faced moon, look favourably upon our sacrifices. That's the incantation to the goddess Hecate, or Hecate, which is ancient Greek. For men have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink. It is their due. Okay, the Bible, New Testament. That's Revelation. I like this one. The deep, dead way is darkest, longest. Typical Anglo-Saxons. They don't mess about. Every people, every stock is threatened by a Vukudalak and defended by a Kresnik. That's a traditional Istrian saying. Okay. According to the Hebrew legend, Lilith was the first woman, part serpent, created with Adam, who led Eve to reveal the mysteries of the Garden of Eden to Adam. And for this, she was sent into the desert, where she became the mother of demons, slayer of unprotected children, which she did with a smile, storm goddess, and she of the night, who preyed upon men. Now, Lilith in that particular depiction was shown flanked by her owls, her sacred animals. She wears a crown of lunar horns with a rainbow necklace and holds an ankh symbol, and she has become the chosen goddess of quite a lot of modern day vampires. So she's quite an interesting character. And the owls actually do come into play a little bit further down the road. Okay, I became interested in vampires and that sort of thing, mainly because as an archaeologist, we had this thing affectionately known as dead men walking. And you might be able to see, let me see if I can increase the size of the screen. We'll get there before the end. Here we go. Yeah, you can see that bottom corner one now. These are Roman burials, and I've excavated quite a few Roman burials. The big one on one side that has clearly got iron manacles around the ankles. These are from York. They're gladiator skeletons that were excavated in York. And what they illustrate is this Roman practice where if somebody was particularly terrifying in life, if somebody was to be feared, they were also equally terrifying and feared in death. And what they tended to do, and I've found quite a few of these, is they would remove the heads, remove the skulls, and place them somewhere else, usually at the waist, or in some cases between the legs, or in some cases down at the feet. And it's quite a common Roman practice to stop people from coming back from the dead, as it were. The manacles are quite unique, those iron manacles. This is a bog body from Boråsmose, Denmark, found in 1946. A rope made of strands of plaited hemp was found around the neck, and the back of the skull and the right thigh bone had been broken at around the time of death. Now, bog bodies certainly imply that the whole idea of decay and passing on is not automatic. It's not automatically the case that that you decay and disappear. And I think certainly in the past they would have found that very disturbing, because there have been bog bodies that have been found in years gone by. This is a very famous one, the Winderby girl from northern Germany, body of a 14-year-old girl who was in a grave of peat. She was naked except for a leather collar and a woolen band tied as a blindfold. It's an execution. She was weighted down. It's again this idea of stopping people from coming back from the afterlife. She may have been a sacrifice, or she may have been subject to Celtic law, which dictated that that was the penalty for adultery. Okay, I've got another bog body on one side of the screen here. It's a man found at the Abbey of St. Bees in Cumbria, over here in England. This body had been embalmed, wrapped in a shroud, and placed inside both an inner and an outer coffin. So whether or not they wanted to make jolly sure he stayed buried, I think is, you know, 2 coffins is enough to keep anybody contained. The other one, the other skeleton's even more interesting. She was a suspected witch found at St. Osyth in 1921 over here in this country. And she'd been buried in a manner according to that superstition in witchcraft, where she'd had iron rivets driven through her thigh bones, her knees and her feet. So she was nailed into her grave to stop her from coming back. But you're already beginning to see here from the past, these are hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, this kind of practice of keeping people who are dead started very early on. This contorted skeleton of a woman was buried alive at Sowerby in Yorkshire. There is a stone that you can just about make out there resting on her pelvis, and that was thrown in probably to stop her struggling and to keep her down there. Again, it's thought that she had something to do with witchcraft and the occult. So there's some of the archaeology. That's the sort of things we find. I believe recently as well, somebody out in might have been Poland found a burial where they'd put a scythe across the chest to stop the person from raising from the dead. Of course, death in medieval times was all around people. It was common. It was something that people saw. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't disguised in the same way that death is now. So they had this idea that death could come and visit you and sort of take you at any moment, quite literally. So it was very imminent. It was something that they had to face on quite a regular basis. Okay, it's not just limited to, you know, the UK and the continent, etc. These are images from China and Japan. They have an interesting vampire which turns up as a gas cloud, enters lanterns, and then comes creeping out as a gas cloud and takes the souls and takes the spirits in the night. They're even in the Philippines. Here we go again. This is an aswang. It's a dragon-like vampire spirit. And here's a couple of I think the previous ones were Chinese. I think these are Malaysian, Penanggal, Filipino, known as an aswang, Japanese, known as Nekakubi. So they're all basically the same idea of some kind of restless, resurrected spirit from the in-between that comes hunting for living souls. Here we go. So let's have a closer look at vampires, or vampire, as they were originally known. Actually, you've got pretty much all of the screen now. That's good. I think we've got everything visible. Vampires go back a lot further than you think. The reason I've shown you a lot of the archaeology is because it does relate to this belief. Possibly the oldest vampire that I've been able to find is Abartact, the chieftain, who was alive between 400 and 500 AD, coincidentally in Ireland. So it does kind of make you think, I wonder if Bram Stoker knew about this chap. Because once you actually get to look at the details, it's quite scary how close the details of this story are to Dracula. Abartact is thought to have been a cruel, deformed dwarf and a powerful magician who ruled a minor kingdom in Gavar in Glenulin, North Derry, in the 5th or 6th century. That's 400 or 500 AD. His subjects hired Carhan, who was another chieftain, to kill him in battle, after which he was buried standing up. But next day he was back worse than ever, demanding a bowl of blood from every subject, which he drank. Carhan then slew him again, buried him, but the corpse returned as before, until a local holy man advised he is not actually dead, but kept alive by his magic arts. He is one of the night-walking dead. He cannot be killed, but can be suspended. Strike him with a sword of yew wood, bury him upside down, scatter thorns around his grave, and place a great stone or monument over it to keep him in. Only then will he give you peace. Carhan did this, and a stone and tree grown from the thorns still cover the grave, as recorded in A General History of Ireland by Dr. Geoffrey Keating in 1629. Now, to me, that just it ticks every box. You know, that's 1,500 years plus ago when that story took place, and you can clearly see there all of the influence, even down to them, you know, staking the vampire to make sure it doesn't come back. I think we've kind of lost this idea of scattering thorns and petals and stones around graves, because clearly OCD applies to vampires because they have to pick them all up before they can move on. So I think we've kind of lost that. I don't think it would translate very well into film and television. Okay, we're going to start getting to things that you guys will be familiar with. You've got to bear in mind, when I first did this, it was done to introduce members of the public to the legends of vampires. So some of this you'll be very familiar with. You can see where we're going with this. These are the foggy mountains of Transylvania. And here we go. Vlad the Impaler. Actually, was it Romania, Vlad? It's not Transylvania. Transylvania is the next one, I think. Vlad the Impaler, 1430 to 1476. I put a little proviso on the bottom. I don't know if you can read it there. It says national hero, because actually, to the people who he was fighting on behalf of, he is in fact a national hero. He stopped the country from being invaded. He fought the people that were coming to invade. But he had this way of discouraging folks. He was a bit of a wild berserker, and he used to, as widely known, stick people on spikes and then dine in amongst his victims. Vlad Dracul, though, dragon or devil, actually belongs to the Impaler's father. And it's his son that appears as Dracula in Bram Stoker's 1897 novel. Vlad the Impaler, Dracula, as he's known now, was born in Sighisoara in Romania in 1430. He massacred the 500 bishops and nobles responsible for his father's death. So needless to say, he was a little bit unhappy about the way his father died, and went on to personally order death by torture of over 100,000 people, in addition to war casualties. He became famous for impaling on blunt oiled spikes, causing death over many days, nailing Turks' turbans to the heads because they wouldn't remove them when asked, feasting amongst his dying victims, and keeping a well-equipped torture chamber busy for about 20 years in Panari Castle, which is the castle I showed you at the beginning. His body was buried on the island monastery of Snagov, which he built, but Turks stole his head and took it back to Istanbul. Now, this is interesting because I did a little bit of research, managed to actually find the only surviving photo, as far as I know, showing the excavation of the tomb of Vlad the Impaler. which was excavated at Snakoff, is taken by George de Florescu in 1931. But unfortunately, from that photograph, the contents of the tomb are unclear. It has been claimed that King Charles is a descendant of Vlad the Impaler. He's just become king over here. So let's hope if he becomes king, he doesn't adopt Vlad's habits. Although for a king, it must be quite tempting to be a little bit ruthless from time to time. Okay, here's another inspiration to followers of vampires. Elizabeth or Elsabeth Bathroy, 1560 to 1614. The subtitle, this one I put, is Holding Back the Years, because she did everything she possibly could to stay young. That seems to be her thing. But she was certainly an inspiration when it came to things like the Hammer horror movies that were made in the 1970s. She's a distant relative of Vlad. Elizabeth Bathroy was born in 1560 on the Hungarian-Transylvanian border and came to believe that she could attain eternal youth through sexual affairs, black magic and bathing in blood, blood especially from noble-born virgins. Her husband died in 1604, leaving a Carthage castle, where by her own admission she killed over 650 young female victims in various sadistic ways, including bleeding dry, being beaten alive by insects, beaten and whipped to death, soaked and frozen, Iron Maiden, which is a spiked case, burnt, nailed, bled in a spike cage, plus many more. King Matthias II of Hungary ordered an investigation and raided the castle in 1610, finding 50 dead victims in various states. Elizabeth was then walled into her bedchamber. This is the very famous bit, and fed through a small slot until she died around about 4 years later. And then no one was permitted to speak of her for 100 years thereafter. So she certainly made an impression. The remains of Carthage Castle are still there, where these folks died. As an archaeologist, I'd love to go and have a nosy round, but it's very doubtful it's going to happen anytime soon. Okay, moving on a little bit. We've kind of we've gone now from sort of the Celtic Dark Ages through sort of Middle Ages, medieval times. We're coming up now to the age of print. There's a couple of things here that came out. The idea of corpses that rose from the grave to suck human blood obviously existed long before the development of horror fiction that we have today. There's a lecture there. It's Latin, Mastictio Mortuorium. It was delivered to the University of Leipzig in 1679 by a student of the occult, and then coming through into slightly more modern times, again, dissertations on apparitions and spirits and vampires. Hey, there you go. So that's probably the first book to actually, from the 1600s, to actually mention vampires. So they're starting to come through now into print, into literature. You've probably heard the saying, "For whom the bell tolls." Certainly it's a famous Metallica rock track. And it's based on this idea. This is the Deliverance coffin. It's the actual patent. And the idea was that if you wandered through a graveyard at night and you could hear a bell tolling, it meant that somebody had been buried alive. They were still in the coffin alive. This one's an interesting patent because it has a large sponge mop, ragged looking mop on the end of a pole, which you jiggled up and down, which I don't think was quite as effective. I don't think this one ever took off. But the idea of "for whom the bell tolls" comes from this idea that if you hear a bell tolling in a graveyard at night, it's because somebody there has been buried alive, which happens quite a lot in horror movies. Okay, coming slightly closer then to our day and age. Vampires. We're now into the age of vampires. Okay, this is quite text driven, so I'll try and whiz through these as quickly as I can. There's vampire names down the centuries. We've got, I'll have a go at pronouncing some of these. I don't usually read this, I let people read it off the screen. There's Alp, which is German, Blatsoga, which is Bosnian German. I'm going to take ages doing this. I'll just do the names: Berkelas, Dakanavar, Doppelsauger, Incubus, Cara Condigiolus, Lideric Nadale, Morai, Netzura, Nosferatu, most folks will be familiar with that one. Pejafissa, Sanguiscaga, Tikaloche, Vampire Lupagarus, Babo and Sith, Brooks Sa, Chesme, Dergadul, Dampier, Krovijak, Lampier, Ligugat, yes, Moroni, Nalapsi, Pamgri, Rovanush, Stragoi, Upia, Zemu. They're various names from various countries. And I probably did an appallingly bad job of pronouncing some of those, so my apologies. I think I can see I see some laughter there in the room. But anyway, I had a good try. It's quite difficult doing this over a distance, actually. I don't usually do these things. It's a shame you can't see the actual these actual artworks up close, because some of this is quite good. Okay, Stoker's biographer states that the idea for a book about a vampire came to Stoker in a dream. So I thought that was quite significant, because that's the same way that Stevenson conceived Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the same way that Mary Shelley imagined Frankenstein. So certainly in the Victorian period, a lot of these guys and girls that were writing horror were getting ideas from somewhere else, the mysterious beyond. Okay. Some of the causes of becoming a vampire: you can inherit the condition if you have a vampire parent. You can be obviously bitten by a vampire and survive. You can drink the blood of a vampire or get it through blood transfusion. Having your corpse exposed to the light of a full moon, especially if you're a murder victim. Committing suicide or suffering a violent death, and being a sorcerer or a werewolf in life. Now, I don't know how aware folks are, but there's a huge crossover between vampires and werewolves. Some people even believe that if you could in some way dispose of a werewolf, it could transmute into a vampire. So there is a crossover in beliefs in certain circles between the two. You're beginning to see the idea where some of these movies got their ideas from, which I will explore later on. Here we go. Vampires issue forth from their graves in the night, attack people sleeping quietly in their beds, suck out all the blood from their bodies and destroy them. They beset men, women and children alike, sparing neither age nor sex. Some who, when at the point of death, have been asked if they can tell what is causing their decease, reply that such and such persons lately deceased have arisen from the tomb to torment and torture them. That's Dissertatio de Vamris, Johann Heinrich Zophius and Carl Francis von Dahlen, 1733. So you can see they've been taking vampires seriously for a very long time. Ways to spot a vampire. Okay, vampires that retain human form have very pale skin. Others resemble flames, dragons, floating heads, and even trolls. Okay, aversion to garlic, especially large raw cloves, and they also dislike the smell of frying onions. So you'll never find a vampire at a burger van. Silver will repel some vampires. Iron repels others. The metal burns the skin and repels their image, which is why they can't be photographed. Because in the old days, of course, they used silver nitrate to produce the glass plate photographs, so the image wouldn't be recorded on the silver nitrate. They avoid mirrors as they have no reflection. Some say this is because they have no soul. Others that the silver backing repels their image. Vampires avoid sunlight as it burns their skin faster than normal and cast no shadow, even in strong light, unless you're part of the cast of Twilight, of course. They fear holy ground, churches and holy symbols such as crucifixes. Most will turn away from a cross. Romanian vampires may be extremely obsessive and spend hours gathering small stones. Vampires sleep in coffins or crypts and make their homes in cemeteries. I hope some of this is new to folks. It did take me quite a long time to put this together, actually. Some of it's a bit obscure. Okay, you're going to like this quote. Within stood a tall old man, clean shaven, save for a long white moustache, and clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of colour about him anywhere. He moved impulsively forward, and holding out his hand, grasped mine with a strength that made me wince, an effect that was not lessened by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Okay, that's the first encounter with Count Dracula in Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1897. That's the first time he appears. Okay, symptoms of being a vampire. Okay, aversion to sunlight, pale skin, red eyes and foul breath, lack of reflection in a mirror, hairy palms of the hand, bushy eyebrows which join over the nose. In Bulgaria, vampires have only one nostril. In Poland, they have a sharp point like a bee sting on the tip of their tongues, small finger-sized holes around the edge of the vampire's grave, and a lack of decomposition in the grave, unless, of course, the person is a saint, in which case the same thing applies. Of course, vampires can change themselves into other animals. So that's something we'll come to in a moment. I had to put this in. Everyone's going to groan. It's my favourite vampire joke. But I'm not hungry, mummy. Shut up and drink your soup before it clots. Sorry. Had to put that one in. Can't even remember where that came up. Came up in one of the books I was studying. Okay, vampire transformations, they can change. This is a list of the things that they have been known over the years to turn into, okay? A wolf, a werewolf, a black dog, a fox, an Alsatian dog, a crow, a raven, a jackdaw and an owl, a bat, a vampire bat, a harpy, a wild cat, a black cat, a panther, vapor, mist or fog, cloud, a ghost, glittering dust, demonic forms, rats, flies, or large spiders. Okay, they have also got control over creatures like this, birds and entities. It's said that they can command them, but they're not invincible. Vampires are by no means invincible. So there are ways you can avoid them if you happen to come face to face with them. Three golden rules in overcoming a vampire. Okay, here we go. This is from a relatively modern book by Dr. Robert Curran in 2010. Okay, the 3 ways of overcoming a vampire: protection, distraction, and diversion. Okay, try to make sure there is fresh or running water, for example, a river or stream, as a barrier between you and the vampire. It's well known that no unholy thing can cross running water, so as long as you stay on the other side, the vampire cannot get to you. You are then free to make your escape. Of course, the distraction and diversion is things like seeds and stones and thorns. You can really get them. Distracted, apparently. Ways to kill a vampire: strings of garlic about the person, windows and doors. Drive a stake of aspen, maple, hawthorn, or whitethorn through the heart with a single blow. Holy water, crucifixes, rosaries, and any other sacred holy symbols used with belief. Nailing the vampire corpse to the base of their coffin with iron nails, preferably through the skull. Beheading, then stuffing the neck with garlic salt, or wedging the head between the knees. Stuffing garlic into the mouth of the vampire and spreading garlic thorns and poppy seeds in and around the coffin. Remove the heart and burn it to ashes, or burn the whole vampire and scatter the ashes. In Bulgaria, they corner the vampire and attract it into a bottle containing human blood, which is sealed with an icon and buried in secret. So if you happen to dig any of those up, don't open them. And then, of course, there's the famous death by bright sunlight, preferably a sunrise. Okay, Victorian vampires. I did hear a name check. The previous speaker mentioned Varney the vampire. It is actually the first proper vampire tale to come out quite a few years before Dracula. and it came out in one of these penny dreadfuls, the kind of the magazines that were printed for reading in leisure time, before the days of television and internet and all that sort of thing, and radio. And they used to sit around and read these things at weekends, and Varney was the first one. So he sort of starts the ball rolling into the days of modern literature. And then, of course, that's followed by Dracula. And then you've got things like Nosferatu coming through. I'm going to try and do a whistle-stop tour through these if I can, because you guys will be very familiar with a lot of these. The inspiration for Count Dracula's castle is thought to be this. This is Ecclescreek House up in Scotland. If any guys want to look into Ecclescreek House, it's been derelict for a very long time, and the family, the current owners that are living there, are trying to get it restored. And it certainly looks like it could very well be the inspiration for Dracula's house in Bram Stoker's novel. So, but it certainly needs a lot of work doing to it. It's not in a very good condition. Of course, Nosferatu is fabulous. It doesn't matter which version or which movie, or even some of the spin-offs that have been produced, colour or black and white. It's a fabulous, fabulous thread of vampirism. It really is good. And of course, there's that famous shot where he fades out as the sun rises, and that's very early black and white special effects, extremely early. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Let's move into the proper Dracula as we know him. This is where my interest came about, actually, with Dracula, because I was a big fan of the Hammer horror movies. Of course, in Bram Stoker's tale, he gets shipwrecked and his coffin is washed up at Whitby. And hopefully you can see this on screen. This is, in fact, possibly the oldest surviving photograph of Whitby. It's from the late 1850s, and it's a daguerreotype print. I've put this one in because it's from my own collection. It's a very, very early shot of Whitby. Not at all touristy, very smoky and foggy. And that's where they, of course, end up with this chap getting washed ashore. There he is. My own personal sort of admiration, if you like, of the black and white movies comes from the fact that they have incredibly good heroines. The heroines and the good guys are the bad guys, and the good girls and the bad girls, they're very strong, and the girls do play an enormous part in the movies. And the stage sets, of course, everything that you see on screen is physically constructed, even down to things like spider webs. They're all made as physical props, so they're incredible. They're absolutely stunning. There's no CGI or anything like that back then. So the early movies are, they're a lesson in creativity, as well as dealing with horror subjects. They seem to really bring out the creativity. Vampires in the movies. Let's have a go at this one. I suppose I'm drifting slightly into the next speaker's territory here, but again, I'm not going to read everything off screen, but there are some notable vampire programs. You've got film and television here. Hopefully some of you'll know some of these because they're a little bit UK orientated. We had a thing called Duckula, which was a fabulous cartoon, Vicious Vampire Duck, which I used to really enjoy as a kid. We had Mona the Vampire, Helsing as a cartoon, then television series Dark Shadows, Ultraviolet, Forever Night, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, of course, Angel, which was the spin-off. Blade actually began as a TV series. Then you had Moonlight, True Blood, Vampire Diaries, Being Human, and no doubt there are many more to come. I think they've just in the UK started airing the Interview with a Vampire as a series. Of course, there's the Count out of Sesame Street. A one-ha, a two-ha. There's Count Duckula. Apparently, the reason he ended up becoming a vicious vampire duck was because instead of drinking the blood that he was supposed to drink, he ended up drinking tomato ketchup. So if you can go and check out Duckula, it's extremely funny. I think anyone who's into vampires will find it very, very humorous. These are the Hammer movies. I think the Hammer vampire movies are fairly well known. Dracula, 1958. That was USA horror production. Then we have The Brides of Dracula Kiss of the Vampire, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. They're all through the 1960s, 1970s, which is where I became a real fan of the whole vampire genre. Taste of Blood of Dracula, Scars of Dracula, Vampire Lovers, Lustre of a Vampire, Countess Dracula, Vampire Circus, Twins of Evil, Dracula AD 1972, The Satanic Rites of Dracula, and the little known The Legend of Seven Golden Vampires, which actually was the Oriental vampire legends brought to life by Hammer. And most people don't even remember that was done, but it was. Here's some of the advertising that was done for that. I'm so pleased you can see this the right way round, because it looked ridiculous when it was reversed by my computer. As I say, some of the ladies take leading roles in the films. I think some of the brides of Dracula are just amazing. And of course, the ladies playing the victims as well. They all play their parts. Christopher Lee, probably in my book, the best Dracula. I don't know how many times he died. He died 3 or 4 times, I think, overall. That's not to say I'm not a fan of, modern day Dracula and vampire movies, which I am. And of course, Hammer were famous for enormous pairs of teeth, as you can see. Moving into the modern age. Daywalkers. Oh, so you either love them or you hate them. What on earth are vampires doing wandering around during the day? Oh dear. The jury's out. I'm not sure whether vampires walking around during the day is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, well, let's have a look at some landmark vampire movies first. Okay, we'll go all the way back to 1922, remade in 1979, Nosferatu. Then you got the original black and white Dracula, 1931, and then they just go from there. You've got Vampire, Return of the Vampire. I'll rip through these. Okay, Blood and Roses, Fearless Vampire Killers, Vampiros Lesbos, as the name suggests, that was very risque. The Red Lips, that was also risque. Martin, The Hunger, which featured a certain David Bowie. Fright Night, Vamp, Near Dark, The Lost Boys. Coming out of the 80s into the 90s, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Interview with a Vampire, Nadja, Vampire in Brooklyn, Bordello of Blood, From Dusk Until Dawn, John Carpenter's Vampires, Blade, 1, 2, 3. Actually, there's a 4 because there was a television movie as well. The Little Vampire, which I thought was fabulous. The first time I've ever seen vampire cows. I would certainly recommend that one. Dracula 2000, The Forsaken, Queen of the Damned, Dracula Pages from a Virgin's Diary, Van Helsing, Night Watch, Underworld, 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think they got to 5, but they might have done. 30 Days of Night, Dark Shadows, Twilight, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Parts 1 and 2. Anyway, here we go. Here's some images from some of them. There are far worse things awaiting man than death. Good old Lugosi, Bela Lugosi. Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Well, they don't scream in fear and terror like they used to, so there you go. Fright Night, fabulous makeup job in Fright Night. Again, the ladies are rocking the look. Certainly as the Gothic scene developed in recent years, things really took off. Lost Boys. I can't believe they're going to make another version of that. I'm not sure it's going to be as good as the original. There's the Bowie playing a vampire. I put this one in because this is Interview with a Vampire. It's the artwork for Lestat, and gradually he ages. But I don't think folks will have seen these pencil sketches because they're out of the making of. So I think they did a fabulous job of him getting older. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Hey, I've always got a soft spot for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Oops, hang on, it jumped. The thing with Buffy, though, when the vampires really started to get stuck in, I mean, Spike was fabulous. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. But once they really started getting stuck in, you had things like, Willow and Sander turning into vampires as well. I think they look fab, so much better as vampires than ordinary folks. Then, of course, there's Blade. There's loads of Blade. I do like the Blade movies. Extremely gruesome, very modern, they take the medical side of it head on. I'm not a fan of Twilight, I'll be honest. I've never watched a film or so many films where so little actually happens. So this is Twilight breaking wind. I actually changed the artwork. It's just a bunch of teenagers staring at each other as far as I can see. I just don't get it. It doesn't work for me, except maybe the battle right at the very end, and that apparently wasn't in the original script. But anyway, nevertheless, the filmmakers still managed to sneak an owl into the set. If you have a look there, the early symbol for vampires wasn't in fact bats at all. It was owls. Johnny Depp in Dark Shadows, which is a remake of the American television series, I think he's fabulous. He does such a good job of sort of melding all the different vampire characters together. There's a wonderful shot at the end as well. He goes off the edge of a cliff and he ends up, you know, trying to turn his beloved into a vampire to rescue her because she goes off the cliff first. And there's this shot of the two of them in the waves as the waves are crashing on the shore, and it's one of the best since the days of black and white, one of the best sort of art shots of vampires in a distressing situation that I've ever seen. If you do get a chance to go and watch it anywhere or see it in any form, it's a great movie, Dark Shadows. So who knows what new terrifying treats the undead demons of the night will bring to the silver screen in years to come. You know, they're still working on it. They're still coming up with new ideas, medical or otherwise. There's all sorts of strange stuff going on out there. So I hope I haven't gone over my time. If I've gone under time, we might have caught up a little bit. My apologies for the slight technical mucking about we had to go through to arrive here. And thank you very much for staying with me. I hope it was not too superficial for you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. You're getting a round of applause from the room here. And
okay, well that last quote, the last quote on the screen is Den. Let's see if I can say this. Den Tide Toden Reiten Schnell, which means for the dead travel fast. That's a quote from Gottfried August Berger in 1773. Right, hang on, I'm going to come and join you again. Here we go. Through the wonders of manual
technology. We've been having technical problems all day, so I'm so happy that it worked out. Yeah. Mark, thank you so very much for. Hey, you're on screen here in the room. Thank you so much for a great presentation. It was really interesting overview of the subject here, and of course, there are a lot of. I'm a film studies specialist, so I enjoyed your part about cinema. But of course, and I'm going to get back to it in a moment as a first question. Yeah. But let me just tell you that the archaeological part, so something that you specialize in especially, was fantastic for me, and that was very valuable to watch all the photographs and listen to a specialist talking about it, because I can understand that vampires and death and the burial ritual is something that you're dealing with on a daily basis in your job. So that's kind of that's where very common. Yes.
So that's there's a huge time delay here. I have noticed that as soon as I move here, it takes ages. Being that I was a fan of the Hammer horror movies, as soon as I got into archaeology as a teenager, I was quite surprised at some of the things I was digging up. You know, the connections with reality in some cases were quite disturbing, quite uncanny. So yeah, the beginning is well, it began a very, very long time ago archaeologically, the whole concept of vampires, and it's carried right through. So I've always had an eye on that. And when I did do my TV series for ITV Granada, Lost Treasures, I went completely gothic for that. So if folks want to go and check that out, it's on YouTube now. It's called Lost Treasures. So go and find it. It's out there. It's available.
No, thank you very much. Yes, I will post the link later on in the chat as well. So yes, people will definitely be interested.
Froze.
But,
the line. No, it's just everything at my end then just came to a standstill.
Oh yes, I think you're a troublemaker here, because we're finally alive here.
Yeah.
Mark, one question about cinematic parts, because I was going to ask you when you were talking about Hammer horror, and of course I know that you're a big fan because we've just a month ago met for a Hammer horror night, and we watched several of them in a row, and that was wonderful. But of course, I was going to ask you about the modern vampire. So, in Twilight that you hate so much. I was just laughing here because it's exactly the kind of thing that works like a Red Bull, a red rag on a ball with me, because quite a lot of
Oh dear,
academics,
yeah.
Yeah, I know. Quite a lot of academics also criticize Twilight severely. And I've just noticed that it's enough to look at the dates of birth of the specialists to see the tendency that it's the purists of this world that tends to hate it, and people who are rather into this classic image of a cinematic vampire. Whereas Twilight has been made for kids, for teenagers. Do you agree? What do you think about these?
Well, the idea of a lot,
Modern-
the idea of a lot of teenagers sort of running around, you know, with shiny skin, it just doesn't do it for me at all. And I believe the first and last film they've got this shiny, glimmery skin, but they couldn't be bothered to do it in the middle. So I think it's number 2. They don't shine. They don't have the shiny skin, you know. And then and again, like you say, it's for teenagers, and you know, she looks at him, and he looks back at her. And then she looks at him, and that's it. I wish I'd have been the scriptwriter and got paid for doing that. You know, that's just, you know, just nothing happens for hours and hours and hours. Nothing happens.
Okay, but then, yeah, I don't think that any of us is going to win this battle. So let's just leave it for now. And but at the same time, I also noticed one tendency in your presentation, that you talk about vampires, about Dracula, or about male vampires, whereas on screen your tendency is to show beautiful ladies. So what's that all about?
Well, it's definitely an element of the appeal, the cinematic appeal of vampires, because you've got this, what is essentially a superhuman male figure who transcends sort of time and space. And the beauty of the superhuman figure is actually he rides over all the production. And basically he gets the girl, you know, at the end of the day, whoever is the number one most attractive female, he always seems to finish up with, you know. And as I say, there's a kind of equality there, because some of the ladies turn into really, really impressive characters. I mean, I'm thinking of the 3 brides in Van Helsing. You really would not want to tangle with those ladies, you know. They're really serious. And I think that, especially in the modern vampire movies, it's tended to, you know, level the playing field somewhat. I think, yeah, if you go back to the time of Hammer, I think it was all, you know, about having a huge, enormous pair of teeth, you know, but not so much now, you know, not so much nowadays. But, you know, vampires are sexy, you know, come on, that's part of what it's all about. Vampires are sexy. You know, you can't take that away from the cinematic version. I'm also thinking, I mean, you probably American Horror, the American Horror series, when they did the one called The Hotel, and you had the blood drinking Lady Gaga character. You know, she was the dominant in that series. You know, that's where we're at now in the 21st century. You know, I hate to say this, but you know, at that point, forget Twilight. I know it's for kids, I understand all that. You know, when I was a kid, we went and watched Dracula and, you know, Sesame Street and things like that. But yeah, the adult versions now are quite serious. You know, they're serious movies and series.
Yeah.
Are you
Okay.
still
Thank
there?
you very much. I'm monopolized. Yes, I'm still there. Have you just lost us? Yes, because sorry, I monopolized you, and we have questions for you from the audience as well. So Ildiko, please.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for this very interesting archaeological perspective that you gave. I have a critical comment concerning the beginning of the presentation, because you started out with the very ancient notions of the vampire, which is there. Obviously, we have a very, very long history. But I don't think that the quote given from the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, is actually about a vampire or vampiric existence. It's that whole book is pretty much about a whole series of ritualistic conceptions concerning deification and this metamorphosis of the body actually is an idea concerning how that kind of main god that they believed in, the sun god, comes, rises and dies at the end of the day, and does it perpetually. So it's more about, gaining a new existence on another plane, and I think it's not really a vampiric existence.
The quotes that I use from scripture as well, the biblical quotes, are not directly relating to vampirism as such. So what I was trying to do was give the separate pieces that eventually came together to form what we've got now, the vampirism that we have now. So you've got to sort of understand that, one particular culture was interested in the blood, another culture was interested in the spirit, another one, like you say, is interested in ritual and passing over. So what I tried to do was to get all the separate pieces, and that's where I started, and sort of piece them together. So you're absolutely right. There are no vampires in Egypt, unfortunately.
Well, we don't know that, but but that's
well,
good. Okay. Thank you so much for the clarification. It's clear now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have? Thank you very much, Anita. Have we got any more comments or questions from Zoom or from the room? I can't see anyone, so I think that you got away with it.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it was very much an overview. I think I said that to you when you asked me to present. I said it's an overview, and as I said to the lady that just asked that question, then it was a case of bringing a lot of separate pieces together so that folks have got maybe bits of the background that they weren't aware of. So, if folks just take away one or two quotes or pieces of information from that, then it's been an absolute pleasure to be here. It really has. I hope it's what you wanted.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark.
That
was fascinating. Very good speech. And you have a round of applause from the room. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but
I could just about. Thank you. I'm going to disappear.
All right. Bye.
Here we go. Bye.